We're back for the 94th consecutive year. Only a few of us were around for that first one, so we're back with another series of concerts in Commons Park, and best of all, you're back. We really enjoy playing and making music together, but we really enjoy it even more when we can play it for an audience. So thank you for being here tonight. It looks like we have the makings of a great summer concert season. Our sponsor for tonight's concert is Lake Mills Area Community Foundation, and we thank them for their support. As you probably recall, we usually have a theme for each concert, and tonight is no exception. The theme for tonight's concert is Spice Up Your Life. As you may also recall, I'm pretty good at finding a way to make the music we want to play fit into the theme with a little twisting and turning. Before we see how that theme and music fit together, let's start, as we have for over the last 50 years, with God Bless America. Thank you. Our plan tonight is to spice up your life in a couple different ways. We'll be playing some pieces that directly tie into spices, and in the more general sense, we're going to be playing a variety of music and styles that support the premise that variety is the spice of life. That phrase was popularized by an English poet, William Cowper, in a poem, The Task, and in it he wrote, "Variety as the very spice of life that gives it all its flavor." We're going to try to give it flavor tonight through sharing our music with you. And the first piece we're going to play tonight is that ties directly into spices. It ties into nutmeg. This is Connecticut is unofficially known as the Nutmeg State, and it may have come from its sailors returning from voyages with nutmeg back in the 18th, 19th century, and it's also maybe facetiously relates to Yankee peddlers from Connecticut who would sell counterfeit nutmeg to unsuspecting customers. They'd shave off pieces of wood to make it look like nutmeg. In any event, the interest in nutmeg led to the people of Connecticut being nicknamed the Nutmeggers. Tonight we open with a march by Eric Osterling titled The Nutmeggers March. And here it is. The next piece kind of plays directly into this spice theme. The spice in question is mustard. Too much mustard, or très moutarde, is a turkey trot that was composed by Cecil Macklin in 1911. The tune's liveliness and high-kicking spirit made it immediately popular in Britain and the U.S. And here it is, Too Much Mustard. I don't like people being behind me. I always have your back to the wall. Thank you. Reaching out to as many different types of music performance as possible creates the spice we all look for, not only with music, but with life itself. Concert bands have a heritage that goes back not only to their military origins, but to the background of the circus as well. The next piece, Carl King's Rough Riders March, was a tribute to both President Theodore Teddy Roosevelt and the volunteer cavalrymen who became known as his Rough Riders during the Spanish-American War. It's been described as a gallop's march. You can easily visualize the equestrian riders circling under the circus big top. And here it is, the Rough Riders. Keeping with the march, we move from equestrian gallop to a more traditional kind of 6/8 bouncy field march that is more in the military vein. It was dedicated by its composer O.R. Farrar to the 7th Ward Military Band of Omaha, Nebraska. And here it is, Bombasto. to spice up your life at this concert, some pieces were an obvious fit. Scarborough Fair is a traditional English ballad. Most of us are familiar with the version recorded by Simon and Garfunkel in 1966. Most of us were here in 1966. And those that weren't are acting like they are a little young. Oh. Anyway, you broke my rhythm here. I don't know. That version ties the song to some very familiar spices: parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. However, the version we'll be playing tonight is different. It's a fiery setting of the well-known folk song that starts quietly, then builds to a heart-pounding finish. So this is Scarborough Fair as you probably haven't heard. Here we go. except for me at the end. Marches. They're the mainstay and lifeblood of traditional American concert bands, with composers like John Philip Sousa, Carl King, Henry Fillmore regularly represented. Tonight we introduce a little march variety by playing a march by a Russian composer, Serge Prokofiev. The Athletic Festival March was the first of Prokofiev's 4 marches composed between 1935 and 1937. It was written specifically for the 1936 Olympics. It reflects Prokofiev's interest in sport, capturing the spirit of athletic competition. And here it is, Athletic Festival March. Thank you. The next piece is classical in nature, but very popular. This one piece is responsible for 40% of all annual revenue of all American ballet companies. The piece is The Nutcracker by Tchaikovsky. It's a ballet about the story of a young German girl who dreams of a nutcracker prince and of a fierce battle against a mouse king with 7 heads. That storyline may not ring a bell with you, but I'm sure you'll recognize these themes. It covers the spice up your life theme, and that some of the themes relate directly to spices, especially sugar. So here it is, themes from the Nutcracker. Talk about variety. We now jump from a classical ballet by Tchaikovsky to a song made famous by Dean Martin. Dean was a member of a group informally called the Rat Pack. Other members included Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, was one of them Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and before he had a falling out with Sinatra, Peter Lawford, who happened to be married to the president's sister. Just so you know that in case you were in a trivia contest. They appeared together on stage and in films in the 50s and 60s, including the original version of the movie Ocean's 11. Dean Martin had a number of hit songs during his long career. One of his early hits was the 1953 song that we're going to play next, that's Amore. This is still a familiar song that most of you will recognize, but in addition to being a familiar song, is also our first audience participation of the year. I'll just give you a minute for that to sink in. As you might have guessed, if you don't know the words, there's a reason they're in your program. We're all going to sing this the first time through. We'll all sing it, and the second time through, you can lick your wounds and take a few deep breaths. There's a short introduction, and I'll cue you when to start. And here we go. By the way, when we start, there'll be a little introduction, and then there's a couple of holds. When the moon hits your eye like a... All right. Just like pasta when you dance down the street with a cloud and when you walk in the dream, but you know you're not leaving. To see that window, that's Amore. Now we move to something a little even less connected, if that's possible, with what we've been doing here. Earlier we played pieces tied to Russia. Now traveling across the Asian continent, we move from a Russian military march to a medley of 3 Korean folk songs. The first, titled Betul Nore, or Battle Song. The second is titled Odologi. And the medley closes with the unofficial national anthem of Korea, Arirang, which was also the melody used by John Barnes Chance in his variations on a Korean folk song, which some of you may have played at some point in your careers. And if you have played it, you belong up here. All right, here is the Korean folk song medley. Thank you. Keeping with that image of variety being the spice of life, we move from the Korean folk song medley to the Rolling Stones. This is a piece, Brown Sugar is a piece that the Rolling Stones released in 1971. It's a song written primarily by Mick Jagger, and it is the opening track and lead single for their ninth studio album, Sticky Fingers, from 1971. But this wiped out, again, most of the band. 1971. It became a #1 hit in both the United States and Canada. In the United Kingdom and Ireland, it charted at #2, and the U.S. Billboard ranked it as #16 song for 1971. It's a song you'll recognize, at least if you're a certain age or older. And I'll admit the title gave it a distinct advantage in being programmed at a concert about spices. Here it is, Brown Sugar. The best night for you. All right. We're going to close tonight with an overture composed by James Swearinger. With over 600 published works, he's written band compositions and arrangements in a variety of musical forms and styles. The piece we're playing tonight, Exaltation, is a piece that offers enough variety to qualify as that spice of life. After a short introduction, the piece offers a syncopated, upbeat section featuring percussion. It then moves into a slower lyric section featuring alto sax, and then grows in volume and intensity, finally ending with a return to faster driving percussion and a syncopated closing that grows in intensity to the end. Here it is, Exaltation. We want to thank you once again for being here tonight. We enjoy getting together and making music, but we enjoy it even more when we can perform for others. Some of us are not me, but I've heard some of them are. We want to thank our sponsor for this evening as well, the Lake Mills Area Community Foundation, for the sponsorship of the band. It's greatly appreciated. We appreciate all the support we get from the community. We want to invite you to attend our next concert on June 18th at 7 p.m. right here. Our next concert has the theme of Dancing the Night Away. And we'll be featuring selections that relate somehow to dancing. We will also have a special feature with the performance by students of Debbie Grigas' 3D dance studio for several of our selections. So we hope to see you there. Keep in mind, except for our last two concerts, if we have a concert postponed due to inclement weather, the plan will be to stage the concert the following week. Right now, please stand and at the table and join us in the singing of our national anthem.